Today, we are especially honored to have a speaker with us, joining us from Journal of the Student Network for Open Sciences, an organization at the front foot of promoting transparency and good scientific practice among emerging researchers. We are delighted to introduce for this year's event Magdalena Bolsinger, who will be joined today by her colleague Dallin Hinz from the Journal of the Student Network for Open Sciences. Magdalena Bolsinger has earned both her BSc and MSc in molecular medicine while pursuing her medical studies in parallel at the Frederick Alexander University, Erlangen-Nuremberg. She is currently completing her final year of medical school within the standard duration of the program. She obtained her bachelor's degree in molecular medicine, carrying out her thesis in the Spur Lab at the Muscle Research Unit of the Schatten Berlin, where she worked on the characterization of humanized mouse model for limb girdle muscular dystrophy. She continued in the consecutive master's program, conducting her thesis in the Zunkel Lab, where she investigated the role of astrocytic lysosomal system in alpha synucleic pathology. Her academic path also included international research stays at University College London in the lab at Anthony Shapira. She explored the contribution of lipid droplets to familial forms of Parkinson's disease. She then joined the laboratories of Dennis Elkin and Ulf Demeter at Harvard Medical School, where she learned and studied the physiological role of phosphorylated alpha cyclonuclein BS1 to N and the impact of lipid droplet accumulation on endogenous alpha synuclein. As chief editor of the Journal of Student Network for Open Sciences, she is strong advocate for open science principles and is committed to promoting good scientific practice to students early in their academic career. We are honored to have Magdalene and Dylan join us today. Please welcome them in the chat or through emojis. Welcome, Magdalena.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. That is really nice. I will share my screen if that is okay.
Of course, please go ahead.
Okay, so you should see a screen that says Student Network for Open Science. It is our great pleasure to be here. My name is just Magda. I'm really happy to explain to you some principles of open science today. And with me is Darlene. You can also see her. She is the co-editor-in-chief together with me and with a team of about 15 other students. We work at the Journal for the Student Network of Open Science. And we're here today because it is a great pleasure to talk to you, to all of you young and early career researchers that, yeah, are very motivated and next to doing research actually in the lab or computational research, it is really important to understand the principles of open science and also to think how you're actually publishing your research. So we want to give you a little bit of an insight what the research industry is all about and what open science actually is and why that is important and why you should also think about that next to your research career, next to your bachelor's that you might choose, next to what you might publish. So, before we dive into open science, we have to understand a little bit of the system in research in general once after the actual research is done. And there I will start to tell you something about the peer review process. So maybe you have heard once you have finished your work as a researcher, the most important thing is actually to publish it. Because if it is not out there, nobody will read it and your work basically doesn't exist. That is what research is about, right? We want to contribute to knowledge all about the world, to process and to speed up our understanding of the truth in science. And for that, it needs to get published. So if you want to publish something, if you want to publish a finding, you're going to submit it to a journal. And there, the so-called peer review process happens. So what is the peer review process and why is that important? The peer review process is basically that you submit your publication to a journal, and then you have there a so-called editor that receives your publication. And that editor then decides if it goes out to peer review. And peer review means that the editor of the journal sends your paper to other researchers that are also in your field but are not attached to your work. There might be from other labs, there might be from other countries, from other continents, but they have a very good expertise in your field that you are publishing in. And they are there to kind of independently look at your paper and look at the following questions, because peer review is actually a quality check. The reviewer or the researcher that is the reviewer looks at the following questions. The researcher asks him or herself, are the analysis methods that have been used correct? Are the citations correct? Are the statistics correct? That's really important because based on how we analyze our statistics, how we analyze our data, we interpret it, right? So an independent researcher looks at it and kind of reflects about it. Then they think about, were the right conclusions made? What are they actually discussing? Is there anything that is missing? And does the work advance the field of research? So basically, in the peer review process, another independent researcher is there to reflect on your work and think what is missing to make it even better. Or maybe it's something that is not yet ready to be published, and he gets back to the editor. So once after this peer review process is happening, and usually these are 2 or 3 different independent researchers that look at your paper, they get back to the journal and tell them, anonymously usually, what they think about your paper. They give concrete comments, and then you respond to that and go back into a so-called revision process where you then work on your paper to improve it and then kind of get back to the journal so that in the end it will actually be submitted. And you can see that here, and it will actually get published. So you can see that here that you have the peer review process, and then you implement the reviewer's comments, and in the end you go back to the journal, and in the best case your publication is actually published, and that is what you should look out for, a peer-reviewed publication, because that allows you to have kind of a quality check, double being sure that enough people have thought about it, that this work is actually great. So then the next thing we have to understand is the academic publishing system. Let's start again with the researcher itself and the research institution, because that is where the core, the heart of research lies, right? To actually do research, researchers and research institutions need money. And one big funding source are usually funding agencies that are often governmentally funded. And keep in mind that this is very often tax money. Now, when a researcher has an idea, he or her usually submits a grant to a funding agency and says, that is my idea, very detailed. And if everything works out, he or her gets the actual grant to work on the publication and to work on the research project. Now, once the research project is done, as I already told you, the research is getting submitted to a journal because it has to be put out there, and we still need the peer review process as kind of a quality check. So now the journal does the following again. It contacts another researcher, as I already introduced to you, for the review to kind of ask, hey, what do you think about this paper? What should be improved? What should be taken out? Do you think it is publishable? Then, as I told you, the peer review process happens, and in the end, hopefully, the publication is getting published. Then we have another interaction, other researchers who want to read the paper and your findings. Now, this researcher is someone completely independent. It could be you or me who just want to read and access that article. So that is how it usually works. And you can see that all of that already kind of goes into the journal. Now, what is really interesting, we haven't talked about money so far. And here, let's get into that. So if the researcher, the completely independent researcher, you or me, want to read the paper that has been published, he or her often has to pay to their journal. So they need to have a subscription to actually read the research. Additionally, the researcher who wants to publish their work also have to pay money to a journal. That's the so-called author processing charge. And that can start from $1,000 up to $10,000, depending on a journal. And if you keep that in mind, that is kind of crazy because the money in the beginning came from the funding agencies, so from tax money. And in the end, the money actually lies with the journal. And additionally, the researchers who have put in all the work, which are here the ones at the research institution, and the reviewers are not getting anything of that. So the ones who actually publish from it from a financial perspective are their journals. So that is very, very important to keep that in mind. Now, what are the problems of the current publishing system? The scientific system is under extreme pressure because there are different things that come up that I've already kind of introduced to you. Here you can see as the last point, the publishing industry makes the money, which is kind of crazy. Additionally, it is really hard to replicate many studies. What means replication? That means, let's say I'm publishing a paper, submitting it to a journal, it gets peer reviewed, it gets published, and you're reading it and you're thinking, oh, that's perfect for my own work. I want to do it too. And then you do exactly the same as I described it in my research paper, but you're not getting out the same results. That's weird, right? And that is happening a lot in our publishing industry right now. So that kind of opens up the question, why is that the case? There is additionally a loss of public trust. We all know what happened with the COVID pandemic and what kind of role research plays often in the understanding of society. And then there's the so-called Goodhart's law, which is publish or perish. This is kind of something that researchers feel themselves to be attached to, which means either you publish a paper or you perish. You don't have any future here because as a researcher, it is often important to kind of follow an academic path. And this academic path depends on your papers. That means, let's say you have a finding and you're working on that finding now for 1.5 years. And after 1.5 years, there is one experiment or a few experiments that now add up and add up. And the finding that you thought you had in the beginning might not be true anymore. But now you are in the system of publish or perish, which means you still might have to publish it because you worked on that for 1.5 years and you still have to produce research and a publication. So what sometimes can happen is that researchers just kind of not show the experiment that hasn't shown what their initial hypothesis was and publish it anyway, even though they had kind of contradictive findings. And that is because there are different metrics that researchers are often measured by, which are, for example, the impact factor and the H index. Let's have a look at the impact factor. That's a really important metric, unfortunately, to understand because that is what journals use. And the impact factor is calculated by the number of publications that come to a journal, that a journal actually publishes in the end, divided by the number of citations. And citations are basically referring to another publication when a new publication gets published. So that means, let's say I have published a paper. Now I publish that paper in a journal. Now it is important that this paper gets cited so that kind of the impact factor of the journal goes up, which could lead to the fact that the next paper that I'm publishing, I will cite myself, not because there is actually any reason for it, just because I want to have kind of more citations and have more and have a bigger impact factor in that way. So these metrics, the same with the H index, you could read a little bit on that later yourself, kind of incentivizes a misguided system because the researchers are actually incentivized to publish for increasing their academic metrics and not for the actual sake of research. And then you also have to keep in mind that the money is still also with the journals. So these are two problems that kind of are hard to always combine with our big aspiration to understand the truth for science and to understand what is actually going on. And with that impact factor, just for you to understand, that is usually a metric that journals use to kind of show their actual impact, which means, for example, Nature has one of the highest impact factors in the biomedical field. It is, I think, currently about 50 or even higher. And for example, if you published in a so-called high impact journal, you might have much more possibilities to get better positions, to get more funding from funding agencies, to have other collaborations. And that is something that's really important to understand. So now that we have all these problems in the scientific system, what are we doing with it? Well, actually, there is possibility for change because you have to keep in mind that we as the researchers are the one that are driving that system. The people, the researchers that are higher up at universities, for example, that choose the next professors, they are researchers themselves, and they actually make their choices based on these metrics that we've put on ourselves in a way. So change from within is possible. And that is also why we are doing this initiative, while we are working for the Student Network for Open Science, because we are also early career scientists and we want you as the next generation and us as the next generation to understand that we can change it and that change can come from the bottom. So we are the decision makers of the future. And that is why it is important to kind of keep the possibility of change in mind and actually work for it. So what does this change look like? This change, it's now kind of a bit growing and growing initiative, are the principles of open science. Why are they better? So the principles of open science are the following. First, you have so-called open access here at the left. Open access means that the researcher who wants to read your published papers doesn't have to pay anything. So that's actually really nice. Then the second thing is open data. Open data means that once you publish your research, you have to publish everything that you did and that you gathered on information to kind of build up your publication. And that is really important because that can also help to increase replicability. As I just told you, let's say I published a paper, you want to do the same, but then you just find kind of little things, and in between there is missing like how much did you exactly use of reagent X, or what was the temperature of XYZ, and how did you then actually analyze your data. And if you have open data, which means that you kind of submit your data to a big sharing public data research, that means that everybody can access it. That obviously, as the third principle, increases transparency. And that also increases trust. And as already discussed, reproducibility ensures that the studies can be replicated and we can make sure that what we've found is actually relevant to science. And obviously that is important. Keep that always in mind. At least for the biomedical field, we're working to improve the lives of patients, to improve the lives of societies. So a mistake in research, in early research, for example, can lead to detrimental effects later on in clinical studies. And then there's additionally the principle of collaboration. We have big, big questions to solve. And for that, we need to collaborate. So this open science principle kind of also encourages you to work together, and it's not just about your own metrics and your own status and your own title. So these principles are things that you should keep in mind when you look out for a journal. Because if you produce research, then you will find yourself in the situation to kind of identify where are you going to submit your research to. And here it's important to look at so-called diamond open access journals. They're called diamond open access because the readers pay nothing and the authors pay no article processing charge. That means if you submit to something, it's much it's way cheaper to submit there, and you have an open access right away. Then you have to look at the peer review process. The peer review process usually is often the case that you submit your research, then peer reviewers are looked out for. They kind of write comments, only you get it back, and in the end, the other readers can read your publication. But nobody actually knows what happens within the peer review process. Maybe there was another researcher that had interest in your publication because he or her is working on the same thing, and then they kind of try to delay the process, for example. So for the sake of transparency, it is important that also peer review gets published. And there are journals out there that after the peer review process is done, they actually publish that too. Look out for open data. What rules have the journal that you want to submit to regarding the data? Are they publishing that too? And then also look for statistic and reporting guidelines, because that's also super important, because based on how you analyze your data, your interpretation and your findings might be completely different. One journal that is here really interesting is so-called eLife. They have kind of yeah, revolutionized the the publishing system. And if you have time, you can definitely look into it or keep it in the back of your mind. Maybe you will submit there in 3, 4, 5 years. And they also have gotten rid of their impact factor, and that is kind of in a journal that is really, really interesting. So another journal that follows exactly these guidelines is the Journal for the Student Network of Open Science. And this is us, and we want to show you how you can submit your work now to our journal as a best practice example. So what is the Journal for the Student Network of Open Science? The cool thing is that it is designed by students for students. So at JNOS, only students work there, mostly a little bit more advanced already in their careers. But we want to, as I already explained to you, help early career researchers understand these open science principles, get in touch, understand what the peer review process looks like, and then publish their research. So what we offer are we have a open and public peer review process, also driven by students. We kind of have a training program for students to become peer reviewers. We have so-called pre-registrations and preprints, which means when you publish your work, you get pre-printed already, and then we have the peer review process, and that also gets published too. So it's very transparent. Then additionally, we offer the publication of negative findings. Usually, you only have in the publication process very often the publication of so-called positive findings. So if you actually find a difference between anything. But negative findings are just as important as positive findings because negative findings show there is actually no difference, and this happens much more often than you might think. And it's important to publish that too, so that there are not other people who are doing this 100 times again, because they just don't know that others already found it. So we encourage you to submit whatever you have found on a basis of an advanced research level. And it's a journal that has a DOI, an ORCID registration to kind of change and improve the scientific system. So at JNOS, we have the following structure, and that is a structure that that you find usually in other journals too. We at first have the editor-in-chief, which is me at the moment, and the co-editor-in-chief, Darlene. Then we have the so-called section heads for different sections. So depending on the topic of your research, it gets assigned to a different section, as you can see here. And then we have our peer reviewers that we have our own course for to peer review your work and get back to you. And the special thing about JNOS is that because we are a journal that is made from students for students, we help you a lot along the way. We communicate a lot with you, and if you have any questions, you can always get back to the handling editor, to me as the editor-in-chief, and we kind of help you to structure a really great research paper and understand the scientific process. And this is what you can see here. Because at JNOS, the peer review process is a little bit different. So you submit your work. At first, you look at the submission guidelines. Then we have our editors for the different sections. They look at whether your paper is publishable, and if it is publishable, there is an online preprint. Then it goes out to our peer review by students. And this is either we pick different reviewers depending on the topic, or there even is an open public review where everybody can write comments to your paper. And then it gets back to you and you do your revision. And then the editorial board meets again and prints the publication, everything that comes with it. And the coolest thing is that one, as I already said, you have a constant support by our trained editors and students. And two, it is absolutely free of charge. There is no article processing charge. There is nothing that you have to pay, and you get a really high quality research publication out of it that you can also always add to your CV. So, with that being said, I really hope that we kind of showed you what should be incentivized or what should incentivize your work. And if you have anything, we're more than happy to publish it at JNOS. You can always submit it. If you have any questions, you can always write me with regarding that email. And if you want to follow our process a bit more and what we're doing, you can also have a look at our Instagram at studentnos or Have You Met Magda? And with that, I would like to close this presentation. And if there are any questions remaining or there's a possibility for questions, we're more than happy to take them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Magda. This was a wonderful session, and I'm sure everyone gained something or the other from this. We are sure that your support and from the support from JNOS, our students will continue to grow as thoughtful, responsible, and inspired young researchers. Um, I think right now we don't have that much time for questions, but I'm sure any student would be able to reach out on your emails. And thank you very much, Doreen, for your support as well and for showing up. Um, so now just a couple of logistical updates. This is Zoom room one. So students assigned to this room can remain here. All other students have to transition to the Zoom rooms for the scheduled presentations. We wish you all a successful, engaging presentations, and thanks for once again, Magda and Dareen. It was a wonderful presentation. It was lovely to hear from you guys.
Thank you so much and all the best to everyone who's here. Stay in research. Bye bye.
All
Bye.
right. Bye-bye.